Hold on one second. Let me start the show and then we'll jump into it so we don't have to repeat it. I know it sounds like crazy stuff for just a couple people on, but we're actually getting a few people checking in after the fact, so we'll try and keep the show. So let me start the show. Welcome to the Think Tank, where each day we share the news in open dialogue and discuss how it might affect the business world. We speak with different leaders on crisis navigation and management, as well as experts in professional and personal self betterment. It's meant to be a break and a learning and sharing of good news and ideas to start people moving forward. It's called Think Tank. Introduce a few people. There is Robbie from Thinker Society, who helps people and corporations get their employees and customers to their better ideas faster through unique engagement and enrichment. There's Jeff. He is with an owner of Allied PRA in New Orleans. He quite literally has the key to New Orleans and can make anything happen there for you. Alberto, photographer extraordinaire, uh, shoots all kinds of sports and documentary style photography all over the world, currently all over his apartment. And finally, Doug Carroll, advisor, guru on managing crisis and change within corporations, works with CEOs and boards, those the likes of Apple and Disney and AT&T prior. And that is everyone who's here right now. We've got a few more actually on YouTube. Thanks for joining on YouTube. You can type in something and we can respond to you there. Just a heads up, on Wednesday, we'll have Jessica Micheletti with us. She's going to talk about the mindfulness aspect and how to better yourself. We discussed that with both Doug and Dr. Paulus, the importance of being right with yourself and focused as to what you can and can't do and what controls you have. And speaking of that, there's Dr. Paulus joining us now. And she's a practitioner of that and basically helps people get to that inner self and thought a lot quicker with some of her mindfulness and unique classes and workshops she does. She's actually, I spoke with her today, had something really interesting. Her whole world changed like everybody, but she's doing a ton of this now virtually. It's called Breathscape or Breath Break, and she's going to do that with us perhaps later in the week, but we'll be on Wednesday to speak to us about that. And with that, we'll now kind of jump into some of the latest news and things that are happening and see what everyone's thoughts and perspectives are on that. Should I start it off, or does anyone have something they want to talk about to begin with?
Go ahead, Sam. We'll come back to the conversation Jeff and I
Just,
were having.
the ever continuing conversation on the PPP loan. I was all set. Everything was all placed and all the boxes checked last Wednesday. And then this morning I got hey, we've just created a website for you to do that on. Please go do that. It'll take you 10 minutes and you should get an answer pretty quick. So that was pretty interesting to say everything you've done, dump it in the trash can and here, fill out this quick form and you should be good. So cross my fingers on that. That's a New Orleans bank there, Jeff. That's Iberia, which is from your way. That was interesting. I got some other stuff, but anyone else have some thoughts?
Probably. So it was interesting. This is directed to Jeff, but certainly anybody jump in if they have comments. I had a conversation with a coral person based in Hoboken, New Jersey, literally right across the bridge from Manhattan this morning, just to get her perspective. I've known her for years, but just to get her perspective on what they are experiencing and seeing and hearing on a day-to-day basis. She lives in a high rise. She's got 2 kids, homeschooling, all the stuff you hear about and a lot of the things that a lot of us are dealing with, but they truly cannot go outside. They can go for a walk, but they're going to the grocery store once a week. And while we're all on lockdown, if you will, they are truly trying to stay locked down as much as possible. And Jeff, the reason I bring it up is because she specifically brought up New Orleans, and fact that New Orleans is going to end up being just like, and what they're hearing is New Orleans is going to be just like what's happening in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And I didn't bring up your name, but I just said, listen, I had a conversation last week with somebody that's in the trenches in New Orleans, and while it's bad, he's just not seeing and experiencing things at the level that you guys are. So I don't know if you can talk to that at all, Jeff, and if that's
and Robbie,
last week.
The other add on to that is, and that New Orleans is kind of like the buffer between us and the rest of the U.S. It's like, is this going to carry on from New York to New Orleans and all the way across? That's the big question, and that was so interesting to hear from Jeff last week as to what's happening there. So tell us, Jeff, what's the latest? You're muted. I can unmute you now. You should be unmuted. Go.
Yeah, I mean, everything is, the trends are all on the downturn. I'm kind of scared about what the politicians are going to do. Unfortunately, we've got 70,000 tourist industry. I shouldn't say unfortunately. Fortunately, we've got 70,000 employees in the tourist industry. And I think those people need to get back to work as soon as it's safe to. And the politicians tend to continue to ramble on so that they can get more aid from whether it's from the federal government or whatever. Same thing happened after Katrina. Years later, they're still rambling on about how horrible everything is, and at the same time, people like me are out on the streets telling our clients it's all better. We need you to come back and get everybody back to work. So, I mean, the numbers are downtrending. How long it takes them to react to that, I guess, is a question that we're all dealing with in each of our individual communities.
Okay. So that was interesting here as well, in that Robbie was talking with some people. So yeah, everyone's all set and ready for this big doomsday flood of people that are infected, and that hasn't happened. And I talked with someone else, Robbie, just after our call, and it was a nurse at another hospital. I want to say it was one of the Baylor chains, or Baylor Scott White. She was actually put on furlough because they haven't had that big wave, and they haven't filled all the beds yet. So interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, the British model turned out to be way out of whack. I mean, more extreme. They've moderated it since then. But the model that suggested we'd have 2 million people die or something like that, 1.2 million, was really not that accurate.
Whose model was that?
The British model, the one from that university that they published in paper Science, the one that the Trump administration was using. They came up with a model where they showed the big peak, massive peak.
Yeah.
And scared everybody to death. And they discovered that it way overestimated the potential danger.
Well, Dr. Paulus sent me a couple articles today, which were interesting, about talking about the effects of not going back to work could be more detrimental than people literally dying from COVID. And my question kind of back to him was, first, are all these articles and all these people talking, are they talking with their political caps on? Are they talking with their business caps on? Or are they talking with their health caps on? And which are those? And if you don't know, I'm an apolitical person. I'm a more let's just get it done sort. I'm just really curious, who to listen to and what are their motives. But
excellent point. Because in science we're very skeptical. We want data. Any data that comes, I want to see how they get it. But of course, we presume scientists are objective, but not necessarily always. But we know the politicians aren't objective. And even medical people might not be either. They should be. Right? But they have agendas. I noticed my daughter is going to have a physical appointment with the doctor, this checkup appointment. But apparently they're putting off health checks, their yearly checkups. Well, she has one because it was a recheck. But now what's happening? People don't get well checks anymore. What happens to their potential health? What about people who need kidney transplants. Those aren't happening at the moment, right? So a lot of things aren't happening. So you're right. I don't trust politicians, period, because their motives are totally,
Not science-based.
Science-based. As a sidelight, by the way, just to lighten things up, I check the Dutch news all the time because I'm from the Netherlands. And a couple notes from the Netherlands. Sex workers are still busy. Okay, they are not socially distancing. The clients still need their efforts. So, and the government isn't compensating them for their efforts apparently. So they're still busy. And then the tulips are being thrown away. About $7 billion worth of tulips are being thrown away because they can't fly them to America in the big planes, right? So
wow,
80% of the tulips go outside the country. So they're losing about $70 billion of industry. And you see the beautiful fields and nothing going to happen.
An interesting note on that too. I was talking with some good friends. My family's spends a lot of time in Hawaii, and so we were talking with some of our neighbors there, and they said, they went into Whole Foods, everything is empty. There's nothing in Whole Foods.
Wow!
But they go to the fish market, and they're buying beautiful fillets and all this kind of fish at like $4 a pound, where it used to be 15 to 20 bucks a pound. But the deal is there's no restaurants to sell it to. No one's buying it. So it's interesting to see how things change and what's available and not available when times like this happen. Any other?
Well, is anybody paying attention to the fact that we lost the largest pork producing firm to coronavirus shutdown this morning? So the largest producer of pork in America is Smithfield, and they closed their main plants today because they've got more coronavirus incidents there than in whatever the whole state or town that they're in is in the Midwest. And so there's a lot of talk about the second wave of this whole thing is going to be the migrant workers not being able to get into the fields, the factories closing because they're closed environments, and one will go through. So it's an interesting thing. And as you guys know, I spend some time with the healthcare folks, and Dr. Paulus brought up something that's an untalked about part of what's going on. Hospitals are starting to lay people off in the middle of this because their revenue streams have crashed. There's no heart procedures, there's no cancer procedures, there's no kidneys, there's no all this stuff that generates most of the money for hospital systems has been shut down, and there's an influx of patients that in a lot of cases aren't giving them a lot of money back. And so I'm starting to see big layoffs in some hospitals in the middle of all this. And it's an interesting, it's an interesting thing that is, you talked about what's your agenda. It's amazing how fast agendas change in healthcare when people start getting laid off and revenue starts to crash. Nonprofits start to sound an awful lot like a business very quickly. So,
yeah, I had two interesting calls today. One from a big travel house and another from Pfizer. And they said, look, we've got these events coming up. We're not going to be able to do them. So we need to do them in some form or fashion. So what does that look like? So my first response was, well, why don't you call your normal production guys that you call all the time when you're not calling me and see what their answer is. And their answer was, and this goes right back to what we were talking about prior, is that there's going to be a new, who knows what that is and who's preparing for it. So, and there you go. The majority of people are like, well, I've got my camera. This is what I'm supposed to do. Right. Well, the answer is that's not the answer. And we keep going back and we say it again and again, and this is bearing truth, is that you got to go where people are. You can't change the way people are necessarily doing things and the way they communicate. So they're currently communicating like we are right now on Zoom, or they're using GoToMeetings. Now, there's a million different better, more robust, more high fidelity platforms to do it on, but it doesn't matter because this is where everyone is. So with that, how do you take your meetings? How do you take your execs and your content? And even though you have to deliver it on this somewhat crummy platform, do it at the highest level that you can in the most authentic and most confident way that you can. So they're like, oh, okay, what does that mean? Well, that means let's get all of your execs or your presenters in a cool, not a cool, but a controlled environment. Send them all a studio in a box with a green screen like I have back here. I don't know if that shows, but show them how that works. Give them a real microphone, give them a headset, give them up a light, and give them a couple minutes with a tech concierge who makes them look good. And then in the end, you still need that tech producer, but they just need to run these meetings and turn mics off at Jeff's house so we don't hear his dogs barking or whatever it may be.
Well,
and they were like, okay, good, let's go.
Well, and you talk about the changes, Sam. So my daughter, and one of my daughter's friends is a longtime best friend of and mentee to Don King. And
yep.
Don is the executive producer of Saturday Night Live. Okay. And my daughter and him and Don King were chatting the other day on the phone, getting prepped for, if you watched last week's Saturday Night Live, which was
all virtual.
It wasn't live, but it was new, right? And so they had rethought the entire thing, and they were having virtual skits. Tom Hanks was the host. And what was interesting is we were talking about it, you were talking about all these things, Sam, and Don was mentioning that it's changing what quality looks like. It's changing what the acceptability of content looks like. You know, Pete Davidson did a bit with an iPhone in his room lip syncing to a Drake song, you know, and it looked like something you'd see on TikTok, and it was well received. It's changing everything, you know.
It's your perspectives saying, and level of quality. That this is the new norm, and that's fine. Look at your weather forecasters now, and sports guys. Lord.
Yeah, you know, and all of the news media, and so. But the point is now it's going to change how you do your meetings and everything too, because now you don't need to necessarily, at least in the short term, have 6K quality on everything. It's how do we get together? How do we make the connection work? It's going to be more about making the connection than it is about, you know, the world's best production value, because you can't do that with 200 people on a meeting virtually.
Yeah, and that was an interesting question from Jessica too. When we were talking earlier, well, how do you manage that when there's 500 people on your Zoom or whatever?
Right.
And it's the same thing as how do you manage it in a general session with 500 people in the room?
Yep.
If you need, you know, someone asks a question, yes, you need a technical producer to say, hey, here's your answer, and or you need to go into small group, and these platforms now allow you to say, take these 20 people and put them over here and these 10 over there. So it's interesting. We're learning as we go.
Well,
and our standards of quality they're gone. Well, it's all about content now.
Yeah. And I thought about you because I was talking to another convention group earlier today that's struggling. And I got thinking about, Sam, what you used to do back in the earlier days of Twitter when you were doing curating and moderating off of Twitter, you know, and it's almost, I was sitting thinking, well, that's almost what we need now. If you're all on Zoom, right? Great, but I've got to have a way for you to interact. I need that curator and moderator to try to bring it in near real time, because my presenter can't read all the stuff on the screen. Right.
Well, that's exactly it. When we, you know, a portion of our business has been this professional webcasting, which everyone was like, oh man, well, that's going to really explode when this happened. Well, no, it's not, because technically we're normally on site setting up cameras and doing all that.
Yep.
But this virtual piece and what happened during those times, yeah, you need someone reading the chats. We don't have anyone really chatting, and we get a few here on YouTube that I check on. But you need someone to curate those and go, hey, here's a question. Hey, what do you think about this, Doug? Because Doug's too busy presenting.
Right. Right.
And
exactly.
So, that's I'll share a little piece of a side project we're working on, which is really fascinating. I'll share, first of all, in this link here. If you look on your chat, there's a link there. So when we come out of this, we've been talking about that for a while. What is that new? What is it going to look like? How are we going to act? What is our new business, or how is our business reshaped? Who are we doing it with, and how do we communicate? And that's the big question. And I think in the end, what everyone wants is just confidence that they can go interact and be safe and do their daily transactions to the grocery store or whatever it may be, and not have that fear of getting infected or exposed to something. So we ran across these guys. If you watch, if you go to that website, so this is a bioscan thermal imaging AI camera system that is worn. You wear it as a helmet, and inside your goggles is this huge screen that's equivalent to a 70-foot screen, a 70-inch screen from 9 feet away. But it allows you in real time to see who is infected, not who's infected, but who has a fever and possibly could be infected and contagious. So now you can run 200 people through there at a time. But what a powerful thing to allow people to know that everyone at their venue, everyone at their event is free of passing a virus or a fever. And this is tech that was launched 2 weeks ago. And, when I was talking with my buddy in Asia about it, he's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. It's the same old stuff. It's just done as a wearable thing. I was like, well, no, it's the same old stuff if you live in Asia, but that's not the same old stuff here. Because in the US, when they came out with thermal cameras or did all that, they did not come here because everyone's concerned about your privacy and freedom. But I think much like our acceptance of level of quality of production, our level of privacy will forgive some if you can increase my level of security and confidence. So we're gonna actually get 1 or 2 of these and start testing them, and that could be a really, really interesting tool for people going forward, trying to do live events or just doing general interaction. Anyone seen anything like that before? So that is that. Any other news to use?
Well, the people are coming up, as Doug mentioned last time, with ideas as how we're going to open up. I sent you a thing from Biden, and then Cuban has stuff. People are going to start coming up with different ways, different scenarios. So it's going to be interesting to see what people come up with and what really makes sense. And then the psychological aspects of it. Because the one thing that when Jeff was talking, I was thinking about the concept of freedom, and you just mentioned freedom is a very important issue for people, and we've been restricting freedom greatly, more than ever before. And one of the strong psychological needs is to be free. And studies have shown that when you restrict people's freedom, they start to value the things much more than before. For example, even babies, when they crawl for a toy, you stop them from coming to a toy, that toy has enhanced value for them. So you put them in a situation where the toys are spread out, they'll go to the one that they were stopped from going to before. So I think it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen to people once
everyone will be going back to New Orleans because they want that toy.
Yes. And like I told my wife, once I get able to go outside and walk again, I'm going to love doing the garbage because I have value now, right?
Now you're going too far.
Yeah, no, really. Oh man, golf. But anyway, the freedom thing to me has been ignored, and eventually, like especially young people, their freedom for running around, doing basketball, play basketball, doing the things they always do. That's got to really be something that once you loosen up a little bit, it's going to be very hard to stop. It's hard to even do it, I think in a slow pace, because people once see somebody else being free, they want to be free as well. And
that's the scare is like, are we okay to go do that? Are we still a major contagious environment? And if we are, does that matter? Right? That's part of what a lot of the stuff you were sending it to me is that maybe being contained and stopping the virus is not as is worse than if you just let people go out and do their own business, because stifling business and people's ways of living is a bigger deal.
Yeah, interesting. There was a little, I heard in the news, a little city in Georgia somewhere where there's a really tremendous amount of virus. They said, well, it's because we're a really huggy kissy kind of town. And that's what they point to Italy, for example. The African American community has a higher level. Of course, they are a little bit more touchy as well, right? As well as having their conditions that maybe make them somewhat more prone. So it's interesting. In the Netherlands, I've noticed in the north, where they're more distant, there's hardly any virus at all. That's where my family comes from. They're naturally distant type people. In the south, where they're much more touchy-feely, even though it's a small country, that's where the center of the outbreak is at the moment. So
yeah,
I think,
and look at, and Italy is 3 kisses on the cheek. So
yes, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think if we come out of this, I think we have to also kind of still be distant, no high-fiving, and no hugging, and maybe wear some masks for a while. That might be the key.
Did you hear that, Alberto? All right. Any other thoughts for today? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'll see if there's anyone who can jump on tomorrow, but for sure we'll have Jessica on Wednesday. We will be here tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Wash your hands, stay healthy, and stay home.
Take care.
Take care.